So Be'ezer Hashem Yisbarach, with Hashem's help, we'll try to explain a little bit the difference between healthy, noble, divine spirituality, a spirituality that is connected to transcendence, connected to the infinite light, connected to Hashem, a spirituality that is holy, and a spirituality or a form of spirituality which seems to be a spirituality that is connected to the forces of the negative, of the unholy, which is also called the koach hatumah, the power of the impure, to see what these powers are. And in the context, particularly in the context of what we're reading in the Torah, in these portions of the reading of the Torah, which is in the giving of the Torah and the story of Yisro. So if we read the story of the Torah in these portions, we see that there's a very interesting episode that happens in Parshas Beshalach, in the week of Beshalach, which is the end of last week's portion, which is the story of the battle with Amalek, of eradicating Amalek. And in that story, which is an important part that we're going to try to delve a little bit deeper what that actually means, we see Moshe Rabbeinu lifting up his hands, or his hand above his head. If we read a little bit in the Zohar HaKadosh, the Zohar in this week's Parsha, in the week of Yisro, the Zohar starts off speaking about what's going on in this week's Parsha, starts off with Vayisa Arnes Yadav, that idea of a kohen lifting his hands above his head. And then he continues, we find in the books of Shlomo Melech, whoever lifts their hands above their head, not in a time of prayer, not in a time of tefillah, so this can create tremendous negativity for this person. By not this light, that there's sort of these negative angels, negative forces that take hold of this person because the person was wasting time by lifting their hand above their heads, that is not a posture of prayer. The blessing doesn't come only on something that's full. Therefore, if you lift up your hands above your head, it's called lo yiro p'nanei reikam, that it's just empty lifting up your hands. This is what the Zohar has a long conversation about, the ideas of lifting your hand above your head, that a person should not lift their hands above their head. This is also mentioned in Sefer HaBor, and it's mentioned by Ben Rishonim. The idea of a person should not lift their hands above their head in a posture of prayer. Of course, a person has to change a light bulb or something, they could lift their hand, or need to, if it's needed. But for no reason, a person should not lift their hands for no reason above their head. And only if this is done in a structure of prayer, of davening, tefillah, then this is a way of davening. In fact, Pinchas HaKaretz writes, one of the earliest Chassidic rabbis writes, Chassidic masters write, that if a person is davening, praying, and their hands automatically rise up above their heads during prayer, this is a sign that their tefillahs are niskabel, that their prayers are being answered. So let's just understand a little bit what this actually means about lifting the heads above their head. Then the Zohar continues to speak about the character called Yisro, and he's a very important person in this story. He's Moshe's father-in-law. In Chazal, in the Gemara in Zvachim, the Gemara speaks about different opinions when Yisro comes before Matan Torah, after Matan Torah. Does he show up in chronological order, which would be that first he shows up and then the Torah is given, or it's not a chronological order, and he shows up after Matan Torah. The Zohar writes that not only does Yisro show up before Matan Torah, but Yisro needs to show up at Matan Torah, before Matan Torah. In order for the Torah to be given, in order for the transcendent light, the Ein Sof, the infinite light of Hashem, that's revealed in the Torah to come down into this world, Yisro first needed to be present. So let's try to understand what is the Zohar actually discussing. That there seems to be two things that are happening here. And if you look at this in sequence, you see that this is something connected with to lifting your hands above your head. And then the lifting above the hands above the head, and that is somehow connected to receiving the Torah. And the Torah obviously represents the spiritual correct path of receiving wisdom. So let's understand something about the nature of hands. So the nature of your hands in its natural way, in its natural state, which means if you let the hands loose, just let go of your hands, let go of the controlling your arms. The nature of the hands is to go below the waist, which means that the nature of their hands in its natural state is yadav askani yasen. It means that the hands are busy or mindless. That's really what that means. Therefore, it goes in different directions. But it's symbolically, it represents the hands that are lower than the waist, which is associated with the more lower part of the body, pagalotata, the lower part of the body. And the lower part of the body means the part of the body that's connected to our procreative organ, which is the part of the body that is connected with all of creation, because everything in this world sustains itself and procreates, perseveres, ensuring that it exists and to continuation of its species. So there's something we share with all of nature. That's the lower part of ourselves. And then there's the idea of lifting the hands, whether a person lifts their hands to the position where they're connected to the place of their heads, like lifting your hands next to your head. And then there's the idea of lifting your hands above your head. So what does it actually mean? So let's understand the flip side of that, which is when the hands are down into the lower parts of the body. And Chazal say that when a person, say for example, that a person in the morning should wash their hands because Yonam Haskani is saying, one of the ideas is that the hands are connected to the lower parts of the body, maybe, which is when it's Haskani, so it's just Isaac. It's just doing things unintentionally, not mindful. And therefore, it could also be connected to the world of tumah, of impurity. What does this mean? So let's understand a little bit when it says that Yisro he comes and he adds a parsha to the Torah, but Yisro is a Kohen Midian. He is the high priest in the Midianite idolatry. So he is the highest priest. And he is a person that was well versed in all the ancient pagan practices. So let's understand what the practice is. And what is the idea of idolatry? So it's not simply the belief in a false god, and the idea, or translated to modern era, someone that's connected to a first sense of self, or a sense of self-worth that's connected to persons connected to money or to power, to everything that is external to themselves, and that's their idol. But it also represents something much more devious, which is that in the ancient world, especially in the ancient world, there was an understanding, a certain way of practice, which was practiced universally and by everybody, was a type of spirituality or a type of receiving divination, or through as an oracle, receiving information, receiving higher wisdom, or prophecy, whatever that word was used. It was connected to a lot of types of death and blood and impurity, the idea of kidesha, which is the idea of a sacred prostitution, necromancy. It was playing with bones, like oiv and yadoini, with corpse. What is all this idea of blood, corpse, and holy prostitution? What does all this represent? This represents a type of surrendering to the animalistic world. In other words, the human being, the human being stands in an in-between place between part animal, which is sort of the lower part of the body, symbolic of the lower part of the body. It's not the lower part of the body, but symbolic of the lower part of the body, which is that we're part animal, which means we share a common denominator with everything else within creation. Of course, with the animal kingdom and the vegetative kingdom and inanimate, we share something in common with all of nature. And then there's a part of us that is part angelic, that has the ability for transcendence. And the way we navigate whether we become angelic or animalistic is through our rational mind. So sort of the intelligence, the Chabad, the person's intelligence, which is the place where a person has free choice, we can either choose to descend or we can choose to ascend. We can choose to be more animalistic and demonic, or we can choose the opposite path, the holy path, which is to become more angelic. What does it actually mean? It means like this, that there is two ways how we can be in this world. One is, so the correct way to be in this world, and the most dominant way where we should always be in this world, is through being in a place of our free choice and our consciousness and our mind. We're having free choice. That's the way we should be. But to access something that's beyond the place, because free choice allows us to navigate the three-dimensional universe, to make the correct choices between good and the opposite, to live in a healthy way, to make to create for something for ourselves. This is all in the place of our free choice. We're rational beings thinking our way through this world. In order to access something that is seemingly transcendent of the immediacy of creation, something that's transcendent of the empirical, of the immediate, there are two possibilities. One is to surrender free choice, which is idolatry, and all the negative forces in the universe, connecting to the negative forces are not negative, they're only negative because to us they're negative, and we'll explain this in a second, or through the transcendence of free choice. Either one, we're getting to a place that's beyond. Let me explain. The human being stands, like we said before, is an in-between, between the animal and the angel. The animal, in the animal kingdom, just for example, talking about the animals are completely integrated beings, which means there's an integration between who they are and how they act. There is no dichotomy, there is no separation. And the reason why they act in that way is because that's exactly the divine structure of how they should act. So the animal, because animals don't have free choice, they're not rational, they don't have that ability to cognitively understand and to make a rational choice. They're acting from a place of deep instincts, and their instincts are also somewhat intelligent instincts, but they're acting from a place of instincts. So at least we understand animals. So therefore, animals are integrated beings. That's why Chazal, the sages, speak about that, for example, that when a malach hamav is be'ir is clothed in that dogs, or Eliyahu, which Eliyahu is gematria in the Varagdai is the word for dog, that for Kelev, that dogs have a certain sensitivity, that they recognize when the angel of death is in this place. They recognize when when Elijah the prophet is here, for example, which means that they have a spiritual sensitivity. What does it mean? We see this also with tsunamis and things like that the animals have a higher, they function at a higher frequency, that they hear sounds and they hear rumblings in the ocean that before humans hear. But there's a type of beyond that's beyond this sensitivity on a physical level. There's some type of sensitivity that animals have that are more even sensitive to humans. Why? Because they're integrated. There's no separation between the way they're supposed to be in the world, this divine plan of how they should be in this world and how they're acting in this world. So they're a direct conduit of the divine. They're exact expression of the Creator's reality of who they are at every moment, at all times. When the Torah speaks about the going out of Egypt and says that the dogs did not bark, that's a chiddush, that's a novelty. Why was it a chiddush? Because generally, if there's death, the dogs will bark, which means because the dogs are sensitive to death. They're sensitive to these type of powers. Now, this world is the world where things are revealed. There's a deeper sensitivity. The human being has the ability, and this is what some of the ancient practices of people that were doing is, what was the practice? The practice and these type of spiritual, quote unquote, spiritual practices they involved becoming more animalistic. So the more a person surrendered their free choice. So whether it's drinking blood or smearing themselves in blood and doing things that are very gory and like ecstatic rituals of like letting go of their rational mind, letting go of their free choice, abandoning their place of the free choice, they sink into the place of the instincts. So then they felt that they can experience then spirituality more intensely. So there was like a regression going into the animal world. That's one way of accessing, which is not we have a place of free choice and we're choosing not to choose, and we're choosing to be animalistic. And that's why all the ancient practices, when you look in all the Torah describes whether it's through defecation or throwing stones, all the idol worships that the Torah describes are always connected to some type of blood or prostitution or death or a corpse. It's all part of the same practices to let go of what it means to be a healthy human being, a rational, healthy human being, to surrender their free choice, to enter into the animalistic, even dressing in animal clothes or animal garments or animal hides, and somehow through that, accessing the animal consciousness, which is a higher sensitivity to spirituality, and so therefore getting some type of deeper information or deeper understanding, deeper wisdom. Of course, this is the negative force. This is where we descend from a place of free choice and we're surrendering our free choice. The opposite of that, which is the holy, the alternative, the correct way the Torah wants is Kedoshim. We have to be holy, which means that we have to have free choice. We live in a place of free choice. And sometimes we open ourselves up by transcending our free choice and becoming angelic. Surrender, it's not surrendering our free choice, but by consciously rising above it. Let's understand this in terms of like even like we do this with eating. So for example, eating is very animalistic. The simple act of eating is very animalistic. That's why it's lechem, bread, is also from the word milchama, the word for that's what the Zohar says, that it's shas krava, that it's a time of battle, because we're doing something that's very theoretically animalistic, which means every single thing in the universe needs to eat. Whether it's a tree, it's an animal, every single thing in the universe needs to self-preserve. And the way it self-preserves is that it eats. So when we're about to eat, what we do, which generally eating is the full definition of a meal would be over bread, what we do is we wash our hands. So besides the idea of washing the hands for a sense of clarity, which of pureness, etc., there's also the idea of the washing hands is lifting the hands. If you look at the blessing that we recite when we wash our hands over bread, we don't see a blessing for washing the hands, but we say the word al netilas yadayim. Netila means to lift up the head, like Avraham writes. The idea of washing the hands is that we lift up our hands. This is actually the practice that a person does when you wash your hands. So you wash your hands 2-3 times on each hand, and then you lift your hands up. Where are you lifting your hands up to? You lift the hands up to the position of where your head is, where your intelligence is. So what you're doing is you're saying that even though you're going into the lower place of the body, which means you're going to eat, and that's part animalistic, but you're doing it in a way with mindfulness, with consciousness, with your mind. So what you're saying is, even though I'm doing something that's very physical, I'm lifting my hands up to my moichin, to my intelligence. That's netilas yadayim. I'm lifting up my hands. So instead of yad maskani yaseh, instead of my hands being below the belt, which means just being animalistic and I'm hungry and I'm eating just because like anything else in the universe eats. But that's always the danger that you become more animalistic. And in fact, if a person is truly sensitive, they'll know that sometimes when they eat, they feel very heavy. They feel very weighed down, very drawn down. That's because they ate in a very heavy way. They ate more related to the way an animal eats. Again, the animal itself, it's important to understand, the animal itself is not negative, God forbid. We're not saying that animals are negative. On the contrary, the animals in their way, they're actually higher spiritually sensitive because they are integrated beings. It's when we act animalistically, which means that we surrender our free choice. We let go of our free choice. We say we don't want to think about what we're doing. We just want to eat because we're hungry. And that's just like Vayesh, like Esav says. I just want to eat, drink, and do, and just be. Very existential, very immediate, with no sense of that there's a higher purpose, or that there is even a purpose, or that I'm eating mindfully and consciously. Then that becomes animalistic and it pulls you down. So what we do before we eat, the process of eating, what we do before we eat, we lift our hands up to our place of our moichet, in front of our head. And what we're doing symbolically is we're taking the hands that are below the belt, that are always falling down into the lower, and we're lifting them up. That's the first position. That's the idea of lifting your hand. But that is even something that's deeper. So not only are we sanctifying the eating, not only are we just lifting our hands to the place where our mind is, but we're actually we're saying something deeper. Now, where's the deeper part? The deeper part comes in prayer, in tefillah. So when we make a bracha, we make a blessing over food, we're not creating something new. Baruch comes from the word lahavrich, to make a connection. We're connecting this thing that we're eating to our mind. So, and we're saying that now we're going to eat mindfully, and the awareness is that this thing that we're eating is the infinite revealed in this particular apple or this particular food. That the infinite amounts of ability of details that came about in order for this fruit to come into my table, or even if it's a self-fabricated or fake or manufactured food, in order for this to happen, truly these things have to be these people and that person, this place and this soil and that packaging, in order for this to be in front of me. The recognition that this infinite of the koyach of the Ein Sof was revealed, Baruch Atah Hashem, Elokenu, there's infinite revealed out of you yourself, even in this particular thing, Shakali Yudvar, that became this life and animated this being. This is one way of being. So we're very rational and we're very thoughtful. But prayer, tefillah, offers us another possibility. What is tefillah? Tefillah means I'm creating something new. So I'm drawing something that doesn't yet exist. I want to enter into the place of infinity, into the Ein Sof. And from there, which is beyond my intellect, beyond moichin, and from there I want to draw something out. I want to bring down from the place of the impossible to make it possible. So that's a very different posture. That's a very different position. Because we're not, in our rational mind, what is prayer? Prayer is like this. This person is sick. And this is obviously the way it is. This is the way I understand it. In my moichin, my intelligence, that this person is sick. And that's the correct understanding. This person is actually sick. But I don't believe only in what is being seen. I believe that there's a koyach ein sof. And Hashem is the healer of all flesh. And therefore I connect to myself, to Hashem, which is beyond what the doctors are saying and beyond what everyone rationally is saying, that this person needs to be sick. And I'm saying, I want to daven to draw down something that's even beyond that. What would I do physically? Because everything that we do physically, there's a first of all, we're a reflection of the divine. So everything below is a reflection of the above. But even deeper, there's a visceral sensation that occurs when we do things physically that automatically shifts our consciousness into a state of what we're trying to achieve. So a physical action sometimes allows us to achieve what we want to do spiritually and inwardly. So the act of lifting up our hands above our heads, and specifically in prayer. So we're saying it has to be done specifically in prayer, because if you don't do it in prayer, we're doing it for no reason. It means we're transcending mind for no purpose, so to speak, and that's very dangerous. That's why in the Zohar and the Sefer Bar and all the mystical texts, it speaks about this idea of the danger. The danger is because we're supposed to be rational beings. We're supposed to be thinking beings. We're supposed to be beings of constantly using our free choice. And just surrendering for no reason could be opening ourselves up to something that is unhealthy and detrimental to our own selves. But when we do this in davening, we do this in prayer, the lifting up our head, what does that represent? That represents that we're now seeking something, saying, even though rationally I think this is true, I'm not letting go of my rationale in a way that I am surrendering my free choice and acting animalistic. I'm not descending, but I'm actually ascending. I want to go beyond my rationale. So even though the situation seems to be this way, through my act of davening, through my act of prayer, I want to beseech the infinite one to draw down blessings that's beyond what I normally can receive. That's the posture of lifting your hands above your head. So the lifting the hands above the head represents a movement and of a drawing down from light that is beyond the place of the head. So again, to make this very simple, there is the position where, and this is the reason why we're vertically erect, according to Matan, according to some of the early Rishonim, this is the reason why a human being is erect, which means that we stand in a position where our head is above the lower parts of the body. So even though the hands, which in the natural state is below in the lower part of the body, the pagan latata, not the pagan leila, from the lower parts of the body moving downwards, which represents askani yasem. And that's the reason why it's connected to tuma maybe, and it's a possibility connected to the impure, connected to the place where it becomes animalistic. Our avodah, our work is that we should constantly lift our hands. Certainly, for example, when we wash our hands. So we wash our hands before we do these practices. Certainly, when you wash your hands before eating, which would be the ultimate example of animalistic, or even before procreating. So the idea of lifting hands and then lifting the hands up to the moichin, up to the intelligence, means that I'm drawing my hands and saying, even though I'm being in this world, I'm doing things that are physical in this world, which makes me part of the entire ecosystem of the created reality, which means part animal and part vegetation. And that's the place that I'm living in that place. Still, I'm lifting up my hands to the place of my rationale, the place of my free choice, the place of my bechira, on my free choice, and I'm making correct choices. I'm doing this for intention. I'm eating from a place, like we spoke about recently, about the tzaddik oichel seven nashar, that I'm eating from a place of satisfaction. I'm eating from a place of desire, not a place of need, not a place of lack. I'm not trying to fill a void. I'm not overeating because to compensate for some feeling that I'm feeling, but I'm eating because I want to express myself and I need to be strong. So that idea is all through moichel, all through intelligence. So the lifting the hands to the head. But then there's an even a deeper position, which is davening, which is prayer, which is tefillah, which means that not only do I understand I want to live rationally, which is the way I should be, and that's where the Torah is given to the rational beings, that have free choice, that have bechira, which is in my intelligence. But in tefillah, meaning I want to receive something more than what my intelligence says, more than what my rational self is saying is true. I see the person is sick, or the person can't financially sustain themselves, or their person is emotionally broken, whatever it is that the person is praying for. I'm saying, even though rationally I understand this is the situation, I believe in the infinite power of Amunah B'tachin, and something that's infinite and beyond that I can draw down blessings from a place that's beyond. I can draw them from the place of the impossible to make it possible. That is the lifting of hands above the heads. So the lifting the hands above the head, and this is why the lifting above the head represents the receiving of light that comes from beyond. This is why the Zohar opens up in the week of Yisro, opens up speaking about the idea of lifting the hands above the head. And it shouldn't be done for no reason, but only done for tefillah, because that opens ourselves up to the impossible, to draw down the infinite into our lives. This is also the reason why the Torah, if read in sequence, is that it completes the previous portion of Beshalach, or completes the parsha of Beshalach, the reading of Beshalach, with Moshe lifting his hands, and then continues to the giving of the Torah. But before the Torah is given, one other thing has to happen. So besides opening ourselves up to receive something that's transcendent, which is ultimately the idea of receiving the Torah, like the author ever writes, that idea of bringing down the koyach ein sof into a person, that person has control and has power over that, what that is the whole idea of the Torah is. Besides that, there also has to be a elevation sort of the lower, of the kli, of the vessel. Because every time there's a revealing of a higher light, of the Ein Sof light, if the light is revealed in such an intense way, which is Ein Sof, it isn't infinite, it's beyond mind, beyond transcendent, it's transcendent of the mind, even though it comes down into the mind. But in order for something that's transcendent to come down from the mind, to come down into the mind, and to come down into self, to come down to the fullness of self, the kli, the vessel, has to also refine itself and elevate itself in order to receive it. So there is the drawing down of the light, representative of the idea of lifting the hands, but there's also the concept that the vessel itself has to be elevated. Just take this in a simple example. If a person has an overwhelming positive, even a positive experience, and there's a lot of light, but they don't have integration, they didn't create the proper vessel to receive that light, whatever that light is, that awareness, that epiphany, that wealth, or the marriage, or whatever blessing they received in their life that's considered light to them, and their vessel is not emotionally and mentally and physically equipped to receive that blessing. So the blessing is received for a moment, and then it's squandered, it's lost, because the vessel breaks. So in order to receive light, in order to receive blessings, in order to receive infinity, in order to receive something that's beyond, something that's completely unexpected, that's beyond the rationale, beyond the sech, beyond the moichin, it's important that the vessel itself, the kli, refines itself and allows itself to become the vessel to receive that light. And that's exactly what the second part of the Zohar is saying, is what happens with Yisro. Because Yisro represents the Kohen Midyan, he represents the high priest of idolatry. Not only steeped in the idolatry of the particular location where he was in Midian, but someone that studied and understood the idolatries, all the ancient pagan idolatries of the ancient world. What that meant was that Yisro embodied the quality of the hands lower than the belt, so to speak. Yisro understood that world. He understood the place where of the vessel, the place of the kli, which is the place of the material world, of the physical world, and the world that has inherently powers and strengths and koiches of koich hatuma. Yisro came from that world. Not only did he come from the world, he embodied that world. Yisro represents that reality. So when Yisro comes and says, Ati Adaiti, now I know that Hashem is great, and Hashem is Mikolakim, and Hashem is great in all, meaning that now Yisro says the vessel of the world, because he embodied that quality of the vessel of the world, is now ready to receive the light. So there are two things that have to happen. There needs to be an opening to something that's transcendent, which is the lifting of the hands beyond the mind, beyond the place of Chabad, beyond the place of intelligence. So not only lifting the hands to the head, but lifting the hands above, which is the surrendering of free choice. And that's kafalem hakigi. This is why, in order to receive Torah, we have to leave our bodies. We have to leave our intelligence because it's beyond our intelligence. But ultimately, the idea was that it should come down into the place of our intelligence. We should understand it. We should integrate it. The experiences should be lived, not just have a peak experience and then move forward. But we should actually live with the experience of Sinai fully. And that should be the foundation of Yiddishkeit. The foundation of our practice should be that experience of Sinai. In order to do that, we needed also the lower part, which represents the lower part of the body metaphorically, but the lower part of creation, so to speak. The part that is more steeped in that world, in the lower consciousness or the lower wisdom that the Zohar calls, that too should be open to receive the higher light. And this is an important lesson for all of us. In order for us to properly receive the Torah, not only do we have to be open to receive divine wisdom, transcendent wisdom, which is beyond our intelligence, and also to receive blessings, to open our hands, to lift up our hands beyond our head, so we receive blessings that coming from a place that's beyond our intelligence, beyond our moichin. We also have to ensure that our vessel, our menschlichkeit, what it means to be a human being, to derech eretz, what it means to be between man and man, that we work on ourselves to make sure that our vessel is cleansed, our vessel is prepared, our vessel is open to receive the light. And the more we become a mensch, the more we have the derech eretz, the more we have the worked out emotions and worked out interpersonal relationships in a healthy way, in a holy way, the more we're actually open to receive divine wisdom and receive the infinite light in our lives.